Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing in the semifinals of the winners bracket in the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. Now, as you guys know, I beat D Gukesh yesterday, and today I was paired against my fellow American Wesley. So now Wesley and I have played many games over the years. Wesley came to the US, I want to say about 10 years ago, roughly. Maybe it's more now, but we're very familiar. We've played a lot. We played quite recently in the Chess Global Championship, which was held in Toronto last October. Very close match, which Wesley ended up winning, and he would go on to win the entire tournament and pocket a very cool $200,000 prize. So today we're playing in the Chess Champions Tour. Very important match for a couple of reasons. The winner of this match makes it to the finals, where they'll play against either Magnus Carlsen or Arjun Erigaisi. But more importantly, the top three players automatically qualify to the knockout portion of the next event in the Chess Champions Tour. So very big match, a lot on the line. Same format, 4 games, 15 minutes, 2-second increment. Let's go right into it. So we'll start with the first game. So Wesley plays e4, I go e5, we get knight to f3, knight c6, and now Wesley plays bishop c4, knight f6, and d3. Now Wesley chooses to play the Gucci pianissimo, which is a little bit different from a couple other lines that can be played. If white goes c3 and d4 in one go, it's called the Gucci piano, which basically is where white plays d3, d4 right away, instead of playing d3 and c3, and then tries to play d4, which is why it's called pianissimo, which means a very slow in Italian. Of course, white could also play knight g5 here, trying to win the pawn on f7, and one famed line is, of course, the classic fried liver attack with queen f3, also known as il figatello in Italian once again, because this opening is named after the Italians. So Wesley chooses to play d3 on move number 4. Now I go bishop c5, castles, we get c3 here, d6, rook e1, rook a6, all very standard. A4, bishop a7, h3, h6, knight bd2, and now rook e8. Now, you're probably wondering why both sides played h3 and h6. The reasoning is that it stops either side from putting a pony on g5 or g4, from whence the pawns on f2 and f7 could become very weak. For example, if I go rook e8 and knight g5, I have this big weakness on f7. And if white plays like knight d2, I can go knight g4 and put pressure on the pawn on f2. Additionally, when we get to this position with h3, h6, it provides what we call Luft in classic German, where the kings can no longer get ice skated on the back rank because they have an escape square on h2 and h7 respectively. So Wesley plays b4, bishop e6, we trade, he goes rook to b1, and now I play this move b5. The idea, quite simply, to stop white from playing b5 and taking more space. Additionally, if white can ever go b5, you'll notice that in this position, white can try to open up the b file and use this rook on the open line. So I play b5 here to close the b file. White cannot really use the rook on this open file. However, now white can go rook a1 and try to use the open a file, because white is going to trade the pawns on b5, most likely. So I play rook b8, Wesley goes knight f1, I go bishop to b6 here. Reasoning quite simple. I would love to rotate this pony to like e7 or g6, but I can't do it here because then white takes the pawn on b5. I cannot recapture with the pawn because then I lose the bishop on a7. So instead I play bishop b6 first. Now I can move the knight because the bishop will no longer be under attack when white trades the pawns. Knight g3 is played. Now the reasoning behind knight g3 is to guard the central pawn on e4 so that white can try to take the big center with d4. White cannot go d4 in one go because after takes, I can very simply just take the pawn on e4 with my knight, and I have an extra pawn. So knight g3 supports e4, where white wants to try and push for d4 next move. So I go queen d7, queen c2 is played. White cannot play d4 here though, because after takes, you now lose this pawn potentially on b4. So Wesley goes queen c2, I take on a4. Now this is not a move I wanted to play, but I was already struggling to come up with an idea here, and d5 was my first instinct, but I was actually a little bit worried that at some point white plays something like knight to f5, or maybe even something simple like bishop b2 and rook a d1, and I was quite concerned about the position without a clear-cut plan, and I didn't want to burn too much time. So I thought for a bit, and then I played this ugly looking move b takes a4. Now it looks very ugly because after queen takes a4, a5, white can always connect his pawns, but I have this slight weakness on a5. Now, my assumption here after b5 and knight a7 was played is that when c4, c6 happens, this pawn on a5, while it looks a little bit weak, it should be very defendable with knight on c6 and bishop on b6, and white has now created Swiss cheese. There are definitely some weaknesses on these dark squares because white has pushed these pawns to e4, d3, and c4. So Wesley takes, I take back, he goes bishop d2, now I move my queen to c7, and he plays rook b1. Now the reasoning behind queen c7 is quite deep as well. I want to rotate my pony to c5 long term. So just to illustrate one of the plans here, I want to go knight c5, and I put pressure on the backwards pawn on d3, and after queen c2, I can try to even move my rook backwards, and then put my knight on e6, and take this d4 square and create a bastion. So after queen c7, we get rook b1, and now I play this move knight d7. Now, pretty much almost immediately after I played this move, I don't want to say like 1 second, but probably I want to say after about 10 seconds I played this move, anybody who was watching the cam closely would have seen me give a slight reaction, like I realized that I had missed something. Now, the thing that I realized after I played knight d7 was that I could have played this move knight to b4 here, which closes this b file, and actually white cannot take the pawn because of a tactic. After take takes and rook b4, I have bishop takes f2 check, and if white takes a bishop, I have queen c5, checking the king, but I will also win the rook on b4 next move. So as soon as I played knight d7, I realized that I had missed knight b4, and I was not happy. So when Wesley played knight f5, I very, very carelessly played this rook e8 move, more out of anger and frustration than an actual plan. Because initially I thought, well, maybe I can just go knight b4 again. But much to my horror, after takes, and rook b4, this variation does not work. Because when I take on f2, white takes back, and let's just say I play knight c5 here just to show another line first, attacking the queen. If white were to go queen a3, I can trade the rooks and win the queen on b4. But the problem is that here, even though the queen is under attack, white can take the rook first with a check, and after queen takes rook, queen c2, white just has an extra pony on f5, and the rest is basic. So after king f2, queen c5 is a normal looking move, but unfortunately white can go king g3, and when I take the rook, now I lose the pony on d7, and with these knights on f3 and f5 for the rook on e6, white is winning quite easily. So I was really upset, and then I played rook e8 thinking, you know what, well, my idea is I'm just going to go knight c5, knight e6, and put a knight on d4. Very slow plan, but maybe it works. But then Wesley found an excellent move, which was queen to d1. Now, the reason that this is an excellent move is because white has this great knife on f5 here. As Garry Kasparov, the famous world chess champion, said in the past, a knight on f5 is sometimes worth at least one pawn, if not more material. Additionally, white can move the knight to h4, play queen g4, queen h5, maybe even sacrifice, so to illustrate how dangerous this is. If white gets queen g4, I'm completely toasted here. These knights are really strong. This bishop is really good on d2, and I just lose. Also, another problem here is that besides this issue, white can maybe even sack and then play like queen h5 with ideas like knight f5, and the whole house is falling apart here, and I'm going to lose very, very soon. So after queen d1, I go rook e6 back. Reasoning very simple. I'm worried about knight h4, but after knight h4, I can go king h7, queen to g4, and I have rook g8 because both of these rooks guard these pawns very, very cleverly on g7 and h6. So I just went back thinking, okay, I'm just going to play it. I'm not losing on the spot. Hopefully I can still keep fighting on. So Wesley plays rook b5 here, and now he's trying to create a double stack on the b file. Now, I don't know if this move is necessarily that bad, but it felt like a step in the wrong direction because now I can play knight b4, and if white doesn't get a really, really fast attack on the king side here, he has problems in the center because the d3 pawn is weak. If I get this other knight to c5, I might even have chances to get the advantage or win the game. So here Wesley plays knight e1, and I think after this move, while white still retains a small advantage, the realistic winning chances are kind of gone because it's a very passive move. It takes a piece away from the attack, and now once I go king h7, I simply have one rook that can guard everything. If queen h5, I can play rook g6. The rook is holding both of these pawns. If white plays queen g4, like in the game, I have rook g6. So with a lone rook, I'm guarding my king here, and now this knight is very passive versus being very active on the h4 square. So I think knight e1 was a big mistake. Anyway, the game goes on. King h7, queen g4, I play rook g6, queen e2 is played, and now I go knight f8, trying to rotate my pony to e6, from whence it can go to either f4 or d4. Wesley plays rook b1, I go knight c6 back. I'd love to play knight e6 here, but unfortunately white can actually just gobble, because with a classic double stack on the b file, even though I'm getting my own knight to f4, the knight on e1 actually guards both the pawns on d3 and g2. So instead I play knight c6 retreating, but I still want to put this knight on e6 and then d4 or f4. So here we get knight c2. I go knight to e6, Wesley plays king h2, and now I go bishop c5. Now already by this point I started feeling very comfortable about the position because this a5 pawn is actually potentially a passed pawn. It can go down the board, and with these weaknesses on the dark squares, a rook well placed, the knight's well placed here, I actually was feeling a little bit optimistic. Now the computer hates bishop c5. It actually thinks after a4 black maybe is a little bit better, but I thought at this point I want to trade the rooks, keep it solid, and avoid anything really crazy happening. So Wesley trades here. He goes h4, and now I go back to c6. Wesley plays g3. Probably should have played h5, but after rook f6, I'm going to play knight d4 at some point. A lot of knights are coming off the board, and white really can't claim that much of an advantage. So Wesley plays g3, I go rook f6 here, goes king g2, and now I play knight d4, forcing all of D's knights off the board. We trade all the knights, I take with the bishop. I temporarily have a nice wooden shield here with the bishop on d4, covering all the critical squares, but Wesley plays bishop e3. Now here I played bishop takes, queen takes, a4, rook a1, and now I play queen d7. Now, I actually offered a draw. I don't know if it was this move or the next move to Wesley, because I figured, well, you know, material's even, we both have queens and rooks, not a whole lot is happening, but the problem is that this a4 pawn is either very strong or very weak, and unfortunately with my rook on f6 versus say e6, it's a weakness, because if I could put my rook on e6 here, I could go rook e8, rook a8, and I have a passed pawn with a rook behind the pawn, and it's still probably a draw, but I'm the one trying to win the game. Unfortunately, my rook is kind of stuck here on f6. So queen e2 is played, I play queen a7, queen e3, back, queen e2, queen a7, and Wesley goes rook a3 here, and now I play this move g6. Now, the funny thing is that I actually did consider this move g5, and after takes queen h5, I have rook h6, queen takes g5, and rook h2, and this is actually a draw because after takes queen h2 here, king h3, I can check. When he goes to g4, I check on e2. If he ever goes to f5, I have queen f3 check, and queen f4 is the only way to stop mate, and you lose your queen. And if white goes to h4, I can just check on these squares, h3, same thing. And no matter where white goes here, it's the same thing where the game will end in a draw. So I did actually see this move, and in retrospect, I do think I probably should have played it, but instead I went g6, trying to create the symmetrical pawn structure on the king side where we both have the connect 3. Wesley plays queen c2. I go king g7. Now it's worth noting h5 here is a blunder because now white can take on a4, and if I play rook f2 here, after queen takes f2, queen takes a4, I hang the pawn on f7. So I played king g7 back, so now if white takes, I take, and the king is guarding the pawn on g7. So here Wesley plays king f1, I go h5. Now apparently queen e3 here was strong. I don't actually know why. I guess because after king g2 I have queen f3, king g1, and g5 or something like this, and apparently this is very good, but already by this point I kind of mentally checked out, and I wasn't really looking for ways to win. I just thought stay solid, white can never eat the pawn on a4 because of the weakness on f2, and just make the draw, which was a little bit careless because like I said, queen e3 would have given me a chance to win the game. Instead I play h5, king g2, and now we do a little bit of a dance here. He plays rook a2, and here I played a3. Probably I should have just kept waiting on g8 and g7 because if white takes with the queen, it's still the same problem with rook takes f2, and again we have the classic right triangle here, 90 degrees, and it's winning for black. Instead I play a3, we get queen c3, king g7, queen b3, I keep waiting, queen c2, I wait, and now white has queen c1, which is a very important move because after I wait with queen c5, white can now play f3, and with the pawn back on a4, for example, all the way here, you'll notice if white ever goes f3, I have queen e3, but with the pawn all the way ahead on a3 here, in this position, white can actually put the queen on c1, and the queen is threatening to capture on a3, rook as well, but the queen also covers the all-important e3 square. So this is a big mistake by me, and already here I was not very happy about this. So here I played rook e6, Wesley takes, I go queen to d4, and even though I'm down a pawn, white still has some Swiss cheese here with these weak pawns on d3 and c4, and I should be able to draw if I play precisely. Wesley goes queen b3, I go rook e8, and now he plays this rook a3 move, hoping to eventually play like queen c2 or queen c3 and trade off the queens, but now I have this queen e3 move trying to infiltrate. Wesley goes queen b2, stopping the check, and now I play this very important move, rook to b8. Now Wesley probably would have loved to play on with a move like queen c2, but after queen to e1, I'm getting rook b1 here, and there are all kinds of checkmates on the back rank, and if you go queen f2, queen c1, I now am threatening rook b2 to win the queen, so you have to go rook a2, and after rook b1 with this infiltration, as you guys can see from the bar, black is completely winning here. There are simply too many threats. So Wesley had to take the rook, and now after queen e2, the game ends very peacefully in a draw. We just make a repetition, and we draw the first game. So I was definitely under pressure at times in this game. Maybe at some moments I had maybe one or two chances as well, but a very balanced game overall, and very important because when you start off a 4-game match with the black pieces, you want to be very solid. You don't want to lose. If you lose, you're in trouble. If you're solid, you're off to a good start. So this was the first game that we played. Now, the second game I had the white pieces. I played sort of a Catalan-ish setup. Game petered out very quickly and we drew. Third game also was a draw with the black pieces. Fourth game, I made a very quick draw in the Berlin end, or the the Berlin variation of the Ruy Lopez. We did not go into the end game. I forced a draw on move 10. So you might be wondering, why would I force a draw in the fourth and final game with the white pieces? Now, the reasoning is that I felt that my chances in a game with no increment in Armageddon were better than the chance of winning a rapid game with classic 15 minutes and 2-second increment. So off we go into the Armageddon situation. Now, for Armageddon, the players make a bid. The winner will start with 15 minutes, and most likely, although you can choose the white pieces, the person who bids less time will get black pieces, but they will have draw odds. So if they win the game, they move on. If they draw the game, they move on. The only way that white moves on is if white wins. So 15 minutes base, we make our bids. So as I said during my interview, I thought about this quite a bit because we had a bit of time before we did the bidding, since Magnus's game is going forever. And I thought about it quite a bit. Initially, I thought, okay, somewhere around 10 minutes is the optimal bid. So I was thinking, okay, I'm probably going to bid somewhere around like 950, somewhere in the 50s, 950, 955, 956, whatever. But after thinking a bit more, I thought, you know what? Why do I want to leave it to chance? I probably should simply look at it from the standpoint of, if I'm going to have to play with the white pieces, what is the lowest that I want to go? Where if like Wesley is able to draw the game or beat me, I'm like, okay, but I had this extra time and it wasn't enough. That's life. Wesley just was better than me. And in my mind, I came to the conclusion that 5.5 minutes was the maximum amount of time that I was fine with. If Wesley bid lower than that, I had 5.5 extra minutes, then I would play with white and see what happens. So I ended up bidding 9 minutes and 28 seconds. Now, it was very fortunate that I bid this, because Wesley, to my big surprise, ended up bidding for 9 minutes and 44 seconds, which was way lower than I ever expected. I thought Wesley would bid somewhere around 11 minutes. And so I'm very glad that at the end of the day, I made the correct decision, where I went as low as you can go, as a saying. I think there's a saying that's something like, go as low as you can go. So that's what happened. So I start the Armageddon game with the black pieces with 9 minutes and 28 seconds. Wesley starts with 15 minutes. Now, we started playing, the game starts e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and here Wesley played bishop c4, knight f6, we got d3, bishop c5, castles, d6, c3, a6, and Wesley played bishop b3. But right at this moment, the game was aborted. The reason the game was aborted is that the chess.com mods who started the game, they had the game started with increment versus without increment. So we got to this position very quickly. We're all in the game. It gets aborted and we have to restart. So surely we're going to play the same thing, right? No, Wesley chooses to play bishop b5 instead. Now, I spoke about this a little bit because I had a similar situation in my match against Neil Dubov. When I played to Neil Dubov in the qualifier in the second rapid game after we drew the first one, we played two moves. It went e4, c5, knight f3, e6, and then the game got aborted because we had to wait 5 minutes for the mods to start the game. So the game gets aborted, and I had this decision. Well, do I want to play the same opening? He's playing Sicilian. Do I really want to go into that? Do I want to play d4 or something completely different? But in my mind, I thought to myself, you know what? I've played the moves. It's really not proper to suddenly change the opening after the moves are on the board, unless say someone is completely winning or losing, in which case obviously the moves will be different. So to me, I was very surprised that Wesley suddenly decided to play the Ruy Lopez instead. So I go knight f6, we get d3, bishop to c5 is played here by me, and Wesley decides to trade and go castles. White cannot take the juicer on e5 because then I have the classic trick with queen d4 here, attacking the knight, but also threatening the checkmate on f2. Knight g4 protects the pawn temporarily, but you lose the horse. And if you stop the checkmate with a queen move, I just eat the knight on e5, and that's all she wrote. So Wesley castles, I go queen d6 to guard the pawn, knight bd2, bishop to e6, preventing knight c4 with the fork of the queen and the pawn. Wesley plays b3, and now I play this move a5. Here Wesley goes a4 to stop me from pushing the pawn forward. Knight d7, knight g5, and the reason behind knight g5 is white wants to get rid of the two black bishops. Black has a slightly compromised pawn structure with a double stack here on c6 and c7, the doubled pawns. But in return, black has two bishops, so white wants to get rid of the two bishops. So here I play f6 here, Wesley trades, and now he plays this move queen h5. Now I think this was a mistake in retrospect. I think he probably should have just gone king h1, knight c4, and f4 and kept it very simple, because after he plays queen h5, queen f7, and queen g4, I go knight f8. Idea to play knight e6 and stop the pawn push. Knight c4, knight e6, white still can't push the pawn because of the pin, and he goes king h1, and here I play this move h5. Now, The reasoning behind me playing h5 and the next move g5 after is that I played a game in Blitz, and I don't remember who it was against. I think it was against Sergei Zhigalkov, if I remember correctly, and it wasn't quite like this, but it was something where white had a pawn on f3, and I think that I did play h5 and g5, and I remember looking at that game, and the computer thought that it was a very good structure, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to be bold here. Rather than play a slightly worse position with maybe castles and some f5 later on, I'm just going to play h5 and g5, stop white from playing f4, and make him have to come up with another plan. Now, it's very hard for white to come up with a plan, because even though I push these pawns in front of my king and I haven't actually castled yet, white does not have an obvious way to open up position. First of all, I'm going to play b6, so let me just play b6 to illustrate it, and now my pawns are very solid here on the queen side. White cannot play f4 here. d4 is very well protected by the pawn, the knight, and the bishop, so it's very hard for white to play either b4 or d4 or f4, and white's the one who's gonna have to burn a lot of time to try and come up with a way to force a pawn push in the center of the board. So Wesley goes bishop e3. Now I play b6. The other great thing about this is that I can also just play my moves very quickly, because all my moves are very obvious. I need to consolidate the pawn structure, make sure there are no weaknesses, and then I don't know if I'm going h4, h3. I don't know if I'm castling or castling, but I have very straightforward decisions. You pick this one or you pick that one. There aren't multi-choice options because this is not a classic test. So after b6, we get c3 here from Wesley. I play rook d8. Now, probably in a slow game, I might have considered castling, but the reason I didn't in this Armageddon is because there are now going to be ideas like b4 at some point where white can take and go like queen b3, rook d1, or rook c1, or rook b1 with a5, and white's going to be getting some kind of attack. And if white is attacking here, that means I'm going to have to burn a lot of time trying to defend, and with no increment, things could go wrong very, very easily. So instead I play rook d8, and by playing rook d8, I decided that now if I'm going to castle, I'm definitely castling to the king side because I've moved the rook from a8 to d8. Now Wesley plays queen c2. Again, b4 not really a threat now because I can just take the pawn, and with my king castling to the king side, all these ideas on the queen side are completely irrelevant. So he goes queen c2, I play h4, he plays rook a d1, I castle here. Now I could have played h3 here, wasn't really sure it was a good move or not. I thought if anything though, after h3, g3, it feels like it could become weak in the endgame, and so I chose not to play it. Probably I should have done it, because after queen h5, f3, takes, and c5, white is still very hard pressed to push a pawn to either b4 or d4. This f3 pawn is always weak, and even though white can jump with the knight to f5 or d5, black should be okay. Instead, I play castles, Wesley trades, and now he plays d4. Now, at this point, computer actually really likes white's position, but once again, the problem is that all my moves here, I can play instantly. There are not any other options. Like here, for example, I cannot take the pawn because the queen guards both e4 and b3. Knight a6 is kind of weird moving to the rim, and this is an only move. It attacks the pawn. You can play it in 2 seconds. So what's happening is that even if I'm not doing great here, I'm a little bit worse, all my moves I can play instantly. So Wesley's time advantage is disappearing or evaporating very, very quickly. So he plays queen c3 here to guard the pawn. Now I go c5 here. He plays d takes c5. White would love to play d5, but after knight d4, I get this jumbo horse on d4. And again, if white could play f4, it'd be okay. But after f4, I have knight to e2, and I can capture the pawn on f4 next move. And if white doesn't get f4, I'm actually probably going to play f5 myself. Like, let's say white plays a move like, I don't know, h3. I can now go f5 and try to break up this pawn chain in the center here. And it's very, very easy for black to play. No problems. Great knight on d4, and I should survive. So Wesley takes on c5, I take back instantly, he goes f3, and now I play this h3 move. Now, I don't know if h3 is a great move or not, but the reason I played it is now I felt that white can never really go after this pawn. Since he has to push the pawn to g3 here, it's going to be very hard to win this pawn. Maybe in the long term, you can somehow get a knight to f2. That's going to be difficult. I mean, maybe g4, king g1, f2, g3, but it's very, very far off, and now I think the pawn is very strong because now there might be some checkmates on the back rank down the road. So after g3, I play queen e6, he goes king g1. Now white would love to play something like knight takes a5, but it's actually a huge blunder because now I can trade and go g4 here, and I weaken these two pawns on f3 and e4, and with this weak king on h1 as well, and this diagonal from e4 to h1, it's going to be very hard for white to even create chances. I mean, I'm not even talking about like winning the game, but just to survive is going to be difficult. So this is not what you want. So Wesley goes king g1, sidestepping any ideas with knight e4, g4. Here I played f5. Now, apparently I still should have played g4, but I didn't play it. Why exactly? Why did I not play g4 here? I don't know why I didn't play g4. Maybe I thought he could just play like rook e1, and after takes, maybe I don't have any kind of attack, but I guess even takes and queen e4 is still good. So I should have played it, but again, I didn't want to burn too much time, so I played f5 after a 20-second think. And the reasoning, again, was very straightforward. I saw that if white takes, I go queen e2. And if white plays e5 here, I can now go f4. And there's one important thing that I want to point out, because I haven't pointed out yet in this recap of the game. If we get this structure here, where the pawns are on f3 and g4 versus f4 and g5, I'm better here because I can put the knight on e6 and then go queen c5 and knight d4. But if we go back a few moves, like go back to this position, if white could magically transport the knight to f5 here, white would be doing quite well. Now disregard this exact position because it's not about the position, but if white could get this knight here, like say you could get this position, white would be doing very well. So it's worth noting what white wants, but when I get this position with f5, e5, f4, g4, you'll notice that white's knight is now actually very bad. There are no squares to go to. You can't go to d6 or e3, and suddenly my knight is actually much better on c5 than the knight on c4. So I was feeling very optimistic here, and Wesley actually took on f5, which really shocked me because after queen e2, threatening checkmate in 1, white can only play either knight to e3 or rook d2 here. Now if white plays rook d2, I can trade, and after takes rook f5, black is doing great here. Even material, this knight is very passive, weak pawns on b3 and a4. I can control either of the open files, either the e or the d file, so everything's looking really, really hunky-dory. Additionally, time has already evened out here, so I knew that I was in great shape. So after queen e2, Wesley plays this knight e3 move. Now here I did use some time. I used about 49. So I used about 40 seconds roughly to find the best move. Because initially I thought, like, wait a second, this is probably just a terrible move. Surely I can just trade and go rook to e8 and probably I'm winning. But if I play it with rook takes and rook e8, white can now go check, and after takes, knight takes b3. Black is probably a little bit better here still, but after g4 and king f2, king g3, actually maybe king f2 first to stop rook e2, followed by g4 and king g3, we're getting an opposite side situation where both sides are going to end up having pawns going up the board here, like takes and g5, and it's very, very messy. Now mind you, black is fine here, but in a game where you don't need to win and a draw is good enough, if you can avoid it, you don't want to allow the madness where you're going to win or you're going to lose. You want to keep it stable enough to where a draw is in play. So that's why I didn't do this. I used quite a bit of time, probably the best decision to use time, and I played rook d8. Now it's worth noting also that another idea which on first glance looks like it might be playable is rook to d3. But if I go rook d3 here, white does not trade, because if you trade after knight takes d3, I mean, I guess white is still winning somehow, but let's just ignore, let's say white plays queen d4. I can now go rook e8, overloading the knight on e3. But unfortunately, if I play rook d3, white can play the very sneaky move queen c4, and after king g7, he plays another sneaky move rook fe1. And now the rook is guarding the knight on e3, knight covers the checkmate in 1. I also can't take the rook because then he has queen takes queen. So there's a pin, my rook's under attack, the knight covers the square, and white is actually just winning here. Now I think this is what Wesley was hoping for, which is why I used the 40 seconds to be very, very careful and not make a blunder. So I played rook de8 here. White has to go queen c4. I'd love to play the same thing with rook e1, but now I take the knight. If you take the rook, it's checkmate in uno, and if you play rook takes queen, I take your queen, and I simply have an extra knight on c5. So Wesley has to go queen c4. We trade. I take on f5, not knight b3 again, because again, after g4 with all these pawns on the queen side, it's going to be a massive race. So I decide to take f5, keep the weakness on b3, try to prevent some odd pawn rush on the king side. Wesley goes g4. I play rook f7, rook d5, and now I go rook g7. Again, I think knight takes b3 was fine here, but in my mind, I told myself that after takes, and king f2, we're going to end up in a race here. Am I better? Probably after knight c5, but still, with all these pawns rushing up the board here very quickly on the king side, I don't want to allow this to happen. Again, it's the variance. You don't want to allow this sort of complication to occur. So instead I play rook g7, guarding the pawn. He takes on a5. Now I think this is probably the last spot where Wesley could have maybe tried to go like king f2 and king g3 and hope for something. Again, black is still a little bit better here after knight c5, because when you take on a5, I simply take on a4, and let's say knight c4, I go knight c3 with knight e2 and knight f4, and I have a bastion. So probably I'm better here, and there's no risk, but this was really the last chance I think Wesley had, because once he takes on a5 and I get rook to e2, now the king is permanently passive. It's cut off by the rook on e2. I also have rook g2 at some point, and white can never really claim to win this, try to win anymore. So Wesley goes knight c6, I take the pawn, and now he plays a5. Now white would love to go rook f2, offering the exchange of rooks, but I can simply check and just go back to e2. So Wesley plays a5, and here I played pawn takes pawn pretty quickly in a couple of seconds. Now, I did see knight d2, but for some reason in my mind, in the split second when after a5 was played, I thought, you know what, why allow some weird a6 thing or something like rook takes d2 and a6? Why allow it? Now, probably what I should have done here, since I was ahead on the clock, is I probably should have used like 10 to 15 seconds and calculated, because I had an extra minute at this point. But instead, I thought I just decided to take, realizing that once I take, we're in an endgame now. White has 3 pawns versus 2 on the king side. I have 2 pawns on the queen side, but with only rooks on the board, and you know, let's just say white we're able to trade into this endgame. Even though white is a little bit better here, this should be a draw technically. So I took right away. Instead of playing knight d2, Wesley plays rook f2 here. Now white would love to take, but after knight d2, white is actually lost. If you take the knight, I just take the rook, and I have 2 rooks versus a rook and a knight. If you play rook to f2, you actually get checkmated by rook e1, rook f1, and rook takes rook, because the king has no squares. And if you move the rook to, say, d1, for example, now I can go rook g2 check, king h1, knight takes f3, and next move, we're going to get the classic Arabian checkmate here with the knight on f3 and the rook on h2, and the king will simply be stuck. So white can't really do that either. So what does white do? The only other move white can try is rook b1, but after rook b1, again, I can go knight d2, forking the rook and the pawn, and after check, king h7, rook to f8, for example, I can go rook g2, king h1, rook to f2, and now I'm going to get a classic ice skater here. The king is getting stuck on the back rank. It has no squares. So Wesley decides here, just bail out, plays rook f2, rook e1, rook f1, rook e2, and the game ends in a draw after the 3-move repetition. And with that, I survive the Armageddon game. We draw, and I move on to the finals of the winners bracket tomorrow, where I will be playing against none other than El Magneto, also known as the world chess champion Magnus Carlsen. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of my match today against Wesley. So tomorrow I play against Magnus, so there will be a recap, whether I win, whether I lose. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Once again, make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you have not, and I'll keep bringing you guys all the best chess content on YouTube. See you guys soon. Bye.